Okay, everybody, time for another episode of The Nostalgia Trap. My name is David Parsons. I thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. Today, I am continuing our journey through the English department at LaGuardia Community College. My guest today is Christine Marks, who's a professor of English there. And someone I've been meaning to talk to for a little while. She's someone who is originally from Germany, whose work touches on ideas of selfhood and identity, largely through the works of a writer named Siri Hustvedt, whose name I'm sure I mispronounced several times during our conversation. But in either case, Christine has a great story to tell. Her first entry and introduction to the United States was not a particularly happy one. As an exchange student in high school, she was sent to rural Minnesota, where she was hosted by a family of evangelical Christians who were particularly concerned with teaching her about the evils of abortion. So she has that story to tell and lots more. So this is a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. If you are enjoying the conversations, you can check more out at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. The podcast is also up on iTunes. You can also find it on the Stitcher radio network, which is pretty cool because you can download the free Stitcher app, and then you can put these episodes on your phone or computer and listen to them whenever you want, regardless of whether you have wireless access. So that's for people who ride the train like me and like to sit and listen to podcasts like this one, hopefully. So I hope you enjoy this conversation between me and Christine Marks, and join us next time on The Nostalgia Trap. Thank you for sitting down with me today. I know that it's like the part of the semester that you feel like you just want to go home. Wait, you guys are on spring break next week, right?
It's almost there, so we're doing pretty well right now. It's just to know that it's coming up soon helps already.
That's right. I'm definitely counting down the days right now. So I came to talk to you today partially because I wanted to figure out how you became the person you became, and maybe that's not a finished process, that's a part of the evolution, right? But you have a particular identity as an educator, but you're also a particular identity coming from where you come from and living in New York, etc. Mm-hmm. So I know you're from Germany. Where in Germany are you from?
I was born in Essen, which is part of the Ruhrgebiet. It's a really pretty industrial area. Mm-hmm. With we used to have a lot of coal mining going on there, mm-hmm. And it's just like one giant city when you look at the map. It's I think almost like 8.5 million people or so. So if you look at it, it seems almost as big as New York, but it feels very, very different though.
It sounds like Pennsylvania a little bit in terms of the industrial section mm-hmm. of Germany. Is this East? Was this East Germany or West Germany?
No, it's West. It's West.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this. I know you don't know everything about me, but I study history, American mm-hmm. history, particularly the history of the Cold War, mm-hmm. The later Cold War, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And so I kind of wanted to get your perspective on some of that stuff. I know you might not be, the most the most kind of Cold War oriented person. But what was your experience of that when you were growing up in Germany? How long did you stay in Germany?
I basically spent my whole childhood in mm-hmm. Germany, and so really my first time here in the States was when I was 16 briefly. Mm-hmm. That was 1995, I think.
Were you a high school exchange student?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I want to ask you about that when we get there.
Special experience too.
So I'm sure it was. I mean, that was a big thing. It was like, we'll get to that, but in my high school in the 90s, it was like everyone was getting a German. You know what I mean? It was really? Like our family has a German, and it was like we all knew that it was only German. So it was the only exchange students we had. And there must have been some big program or something going on with that because we didn't have we didn't have exchange students from other countries besides Germany in the 90s. It was just Germans.
You know, I guess there are so many people who take English as sort of a major in high school, and I think that's probably part of, partially a result of the also American influence and British influence in Germany. So most of the people I went to school with actually went either to the States. Most of them went to the States, and some went to England as well. Yeah.
So, at what point in your childhood are you aware of the division of your country and the kind of particular the way that it seems like the western side of that would be more American looking to America and Britain as the kind of culture. What was that like discovering that?
Yeah, I guess it's really it wasn't really part of my awareness for a long time. When I was a young child, I didn't really think about it all that much. And I think it really, when I look back at it, it's really like the big event of the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's the one big thing that's of course stuck in everybody's minds and memories.
And I'm sure in very different ways, because it was presented in America. The fall of the Berlin Wall was presented to us as an American victory. You know what I mean? It was very much presented as Ronald Reagan won the Cold War by saying tear down this wall, and I guess that happened in 1989. The Berlin Wall fell 1990, somewhere in there. Either way, I was far too young to be able to really recognize the political importance of it beyond just the kind of symbolic thing. And it just, for me, it meant like, oh, people who were in prison aren't in prison anymore, and America somehow had something to do with that. What was your perspective on it from being young?
Yeah, I guess we didn't really. I feel like the way that I perceived the story was not really we didn't have this big story of the conflict between the States versus Russia. I just don't think that this kind of Cold War narrative was as present to me as it may have been to people in the United States. I think it was mostly more a celebration of people overcoming that obstacle to freedom, and then of course pretty soon afterwards we had a lot of people coming from the East to live in the western part of Germany, and so I actually had some new friends who came from the East.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I think that was mostly it was really more people, I guess, perceived it as a German story, rather than
an
the
American
big powers.
Story. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in terms of the big powers, what was the kind of attitude in your orientation towards the United States when you were growing up? And I don't mean that other people in other countries are just constantly thinking about America all the time, but Germany has a particular historical relationship to the United States, particularly obviously through World War II and after World War II. Yeah. So, what was the vision over there? Did you guys watch Hollywood movies and enjoy American culture at all?
Certainly. I may have done a little bit less of that because we didn't have a TV in my house until I moved out. So basically until I was 18. So I may have had a little less influence. But of course, in school you talk about movies, a lot of them all Hollywood imports and the music. So I think, when I was young, I had a highly uncritical perspective. I just thought it was this exciting country. I had some kind of cliches about, the American dream. That was already kind of part of my imaginary, I would say. Then when I went there for the first time when I was 16, I was, you could say, very disillusioned and didn't really know what I was getting into beforehand.
The United States, has an image, and then there's the reality, and it's a giant country. So there, depending on where you end up, your experience could be vastly different. When you went in high school, you said you were 16?
Yes.
So what was the impetus behind that, first of all? Did you imagine that you would one day live in the United States, or were you just going just to check it out and kind of got involved in this program to go take a little vacation over to the U.S.?
I think at that point I had no intention of ever staying in the United States. It wasn't the big dream country even. It was more something that was expected because I took this English class as a major, which means you have twice as many hours per week in high school. And so, and I really, it was also because of the language. I could write just fine. I couldn't speak at all. And and I thought it would be, just a great adventure to try living in a totally new environment. And then I made the big mistake of saying that I like horses and horseback riding. So they put me out in the country in Minnesota in the middle of nowhere.
Rural Minnesota.
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, if you get a choice on where you go, can you say I want to go to LA or San Francisco, or if rural Minnesota is just one of the places that you just end up because you say you like horses, apparently.
Yeah, I think it was kind of random, and I think they were doing me a favor, but the fact is that you're really very isolated if you're out on a farm without a car, and the only thing that was right next to us was a church, and my host family was evangelical, and it was a culture shock. Yes.
Yeah, welcome to America. Oh man, so you literally like fly from Germany into like the Twin Cities of Minneapolis or something, and then you get in a car and are
they were there picking me up with a sign, and I didn't understand anybody at first because I had to get used to the English first, because in school everything was more Oxford.
And Minnesota has a Minnesota accent.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. So what was that terrifying? That sounds a little terrifying. I think about that in for going to any country and feeling like I don't know the language, and a family is picking me up from the airport and taking me out to the woods.
Yes.
Is that terrifying? It sounds scary.
Yeah, you could say that. I think I was a little terrified. I think I was mostly depressed at some point because it was just a lot more difficult to make connections as well. I had to get used to the American way of interacting with people as well, because you know how it is when you go to high school and everybody's like, yeah, we'll hang out and we'll do this and that, and then they don't actually mean that, because they just mean, they want to be friendly.
Just something you say.
Yeah.
We'll do lunch. Let's do lunch. Yeah. That's a cultural joke now. They're kind of like, oh yeah, let's do lunch, and no one ever really means it. I never thought of that as kind of a uniquely American kind of way of acting, but I think you're right.
I guess in comparison to the way that Germans tend to treat each other,
there's a more kind of one-to-one relationship. Say what you mean and do what you're gonna say. That's amazing. So it took you a while to kind of acculturate yourself to just not only the language, but the form of the interaction, the structure of interaction. So, your family that you were with, how long were you with them?
It was only 6 months. So some people stayed for a whole year. I only had half a year. And, maybe if I had stayed the whole year, I would have felt better about the experience, but I was pretty relieved to go back home afterwards. And I actually said I'll never return to Minnesota or the United States, and the exact opposite happened, because I am now married to a guy from Minnesota, and I also wrote my dissertation about an author from Northfield, Minnesota. So somehow I was meant to return.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. I have a friend that's in the process of moving to rural Minnesota right now, and knows very little about it, and he's a little intimidated by it, but at the same time it's kind of like, well, what's out there? There's got to be something out there. I've only driven through Minnesota and found it much more rural than I expected it to be. It's flat lands for a long time out there. Were you there during the cold time too?
Yeah, it was very cold as well. I remember waiting for the school bus inside because it was too cold to be outside, and but that I didn't even mind that so much because I like the winter. But the flatness that got to me, and just the sort of field after field after field. And if you go to northern Minnesota, it's just gorgeous. It's so beautiful.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, there is something to like the quiet of the rural areas. I don't want to be like a total pro urban person here, but it's weird because I'm not a patriotic person at all. But when I say they sent you to rural Minnesota to begin with, I was like, oh, they could have sent you to so many better places. There's so many like cooler places in the United States to be in. Was part of it the cultural thing? Was it the evangelical thing get in the way of your experience a little bit?
Yes, I mean, I think there are these cliche stories of people being shown abortion videos, and I've had all of these experiences.
Wow!
Yeah,
so you had that put on you.
Yeah. it was serious.
That's some heavy stuff. And kind of, I mean, for me, like, that's gross from the perspective of what they were doing to you. Like, I can't even imagine. I mean, putting my politics on people that way, but yeah, that's nasty. I feel like I passed by they might still be there in Times Square. There's like a group that has just giant graphic pictures of like aborted fetuses and this kind of thing. And I just feel like that's not a great tactic for your movement in particular.
Yeah, I'm not sure how effective that would be, but that's fine.
So you resisted that? Did you get in fights with them? Did you have to tell them no?
It's
really young.
I was 16, and I think I was generally a very withdrawn teenager. So I don't think I had the kind of self-confidence that I needed to really engage in like a serious fight with them. I just shut down, and I just didn't really talk to them all that much, and so we had a complicated relationship, you could say.
Yeah. If the sound cuts out a little bit, it's because of this thing. Like,
okay.
If you just if you just move it around, it's fine. Okay, so so I feel bad in a sense because you had this experience at 16 where you came to rural Minnesota. A barren landscape, beautiful in some respects, but certainly not the primest landscape in the United States, but also that you had an encounter with what I consider, and I think what many people consider to be unpleasant types of Americans that are self-righteous in that way. So you leave America, and you feel like you're never going to come back again. So what happens? How do you get back to America? I imagine you go to college in Germany?
Yeah, I went to college in Germany, but what happened beforehand is that my best friend at the time, she went to Washington State and did the same kind of exchange only a year later, and she loved it. She was just so, I mean, she just didn't want to come back to Germany at all. She really just, her whole life was
in
there.
In the Pacific Northwest, you're talking about. Yeah, it's hard not to like that place.
It was a very different group of people,
Sure.
so they were, I got to know them all because she was constantly talking about them, and at some point I said, okay, I'll just have to go with you because I can't imagine, because my experience had been so different. And so then we spent a lot of summers in the Pacific Northwest, and obviously it's
great that you didn't let it spoil your view, because I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, and I hear this, it's a very American thing to do, is to go to another country and have one bad experience with one person and go and say, I hate India, I hate China, whatever. It's all like that. And I mean, the United States is a vast and diverse place with a lot of assholes in it and a lot of really cool people. So I'm glad you got to come back. So you saw the Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. You were introduced to people who weren't complete psychopaths.
Yes.
And then where did you go to school for undergrad?
I went to Mainz, which is a little further south than Essen. It's a little more provincial. It's a smaller city. It's like basically wine country on the Rhine.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very beautiful, but it's also has a lot of students. So I felt at home there, and I started out studying law. That was my initial.
I studied law too at the very beginning. Yeah. Why did you study law?
Mostly because I was clueless, and it's something that I thought would be a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah.
And so
good career, get paid well. Yep. There's even opportunities to do things around social justice and things like that. If you ever get that becomes your concern. I know a few friends that went to law school, and that was what they did, and I ended up realizing that law school seemed too hard. Just seemed like I was going to have to learn a lot of really arcane rules, and I didn't want to. That just wasn't where I ended up being. I'm much more like kind of abstract thinker. I think I'm lucky to have ended up in history. Okay, so you're in that. Is that a school that has is there do Germans go through the process that Americans do in the undergrad, where they party, like where there's this kind of
Certainly.
Because I do feel like Western Europeans, especially, maybe that's have that kind of party culture. So what was that like, navigating all that as an undergrad?
Yeah, I think if you don't party, they're doing something wrong. I mean, maybe a little bit too serious about life. Yeah. So I mean, that was. I enjoyed it all. It was a much different experience from high school. I didn't love high school much. And there I found new friends, new people. I quickly realized, and I think for me that was maybe more of a like sort of personal decision to switch from law to literature, first of all, because I felt passionate about literature anyways, but also because I felt the people, I get along with them better when I met them. They just
like the
had
people
a different
in the literature classes and the literature departments. Yeah. Were you always interested in literature? Was reading part of your development?
Definitely, and I think really it's partially thanks to my parents, because they took away the distraction of having a TV at home. And so
was that ideological for them? Was that like a political thing? So they were the people that like don't have television, and they're resisting that for a reason. It's not just like they can't afford one. It's because they don't want one.
It was mostly for the sake of their children. Actually, once I moved out and my sister's older than me, they got a TV. Then I said, okay, now we did our job and that's it. And so I think that really brought me to reading pretty early on. I mean, I read a lot of trash, but still, I read, and it meant something to me. And
because you start to have a relationship with the page in a way that's different. Whatever you're reading. I know it's hard to remember your favorites when you're put on a spot like this, but who were the writers that affected you the most? Who were the writers that kind of made an impact on you young?
Oh, when I was really young,
or even in college.
Yeah, I guess you could say that very early on I did really like the works of Paul Auster, who was, basically, and then I kind of switched over when I started my PhD, and I wrote about his wife's
Siri Hustvedt, right? Yeah.
Works. So, and when that was really a revelation when I found her work, which I had never read a book beforehand, and then I read them all. She had 3 novels at the time, and was just wow, I can't believe.
How long has she been writing for? A few decades, it sounds like.
I guess, really like about 20 years or so. And she's super successful in Europe, but unfortunately not as well known over here.
Yeah, people know her as Paul Auster's wife or something.
Yeah, and it's terrible.
I have to admit, I haven't read her work, and I have read a lot of Paul Auster's stuff. In fact, I haven't read a lot of Paul Auster's stuff recently, but I think it was the New York trilogy that made me want to come to New York, honestly. Reading the New York trilogy. And I had a professor who was very important to me in college, who, when I graduated, she gave me a copy of Moon Palace. And I'd never heard of Paul Auster, and she said, you need to read this. And I think that reading that book honestly set me on the course to eventually living in New York, because the way he writes about New York is a particularly magical kind of thing, and I'd never really conceived it as a metaphysical space in the way that he kind of constructs it. Okay, so you're in undergrad in Germany. What happens after that? How do you get? When did you come to the United States?
So then the next time I came to the States was in 2001. So I went to Sacramento to go to California State for a year.
Okay.
It was an exchange. It was a super great year. I think the West Coast just kind of,
being from the West Coast, I still it's kind of a golden place to me. And Sacramento honestly isn't the best part of the West Coast, and by any means, I don't think anyone would put Sacramento at the top of the list. But it is the capital of the state. It is where UC Davis is. What school were you going to?
It was California State.
Cal State Sacramento.
And I really, it's a nice campus. I had some pretty great professors there. And the one thing, it's really funny because I always get that reaction like, Sacramento, I'm sorry, almost, because it's really not the coolest place. But I thought it was kind of awesome. They had a giant poetry community.
The coast,
So there were, no matter where you could always go and write and read poetry. That was the only year in my life I ever did that. I never went back to it, but somehow there was something, in the air, and
so
something that affected me.
So Sacramento's the only place you wrote poetry and read poetry. That's funny. I never think of the Sacramento poetry scene, but now I need to check it out, because the poetry is such is an art form that used to be honored a lot more in American culture, and there certainly have been phases and ups and downs in the history of poetry, but Sacramento as a center of poetry, I've never really investigated. I've never thought of that. I have to look at that.
Well, I'm sure it's probably because there's San Francisco next to
right,
it, and
right.
that's probably more
Sacramento
amazing.
always has been, I think, resentful of like being San Francisco's little brother over there. Okay, so you're. It sounds like you're starting to have more of an engagement with the United States through college.
Yes.
And after that, where do you go after Sacramento?
I think then the next big trip was really New York then, because I finished my master's and then I started writing my PhD, and we had an exchange program with Columbia University. So I spent a year there. And while I was there, I met my now husband.
Okay.
That's sort of how I got really
that's
stuck.
part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you met him in New York City?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that begins I would imagine, a more serious engagement with thinking of living in the United States.
Absolutely.
Have you only lived in New York City?
So really here, just on the East Coast, only in New York City, and then the year in Sacramento on the West Coast, and Minnesota. That was it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you still visit Minnesota, you said?
Yeah,
here and there,
because of
family
my
and friends there?
in-laws, we do go back at least once a year, sometimes more often. We're actually going back in April because a friend of my husband is doing a big party fundraiser because he wants to make a movie. So we're definitely back every once in a while. Yeah.
Okay, so you have this kind of this relationship with this author, Siri Hustvedt. Is that right? How does that go from being someone that you like reading in your undergrad years to someone that you are studying and writing about seriously as a graduate?
Yeah, I really loved the whole process. I really enjoy writing about somebody who's still alive and you can actually engage in a conversation with.
Yes.
She's been incredibly gracious and friendly, and she met up with me when I was at Columbia for the first interview, and then we had several after that, and now we're still in touch. We went to Mainz together to a conference. She's actually, I mean, we have dinner and we just exchange ideas, and it's been such a rewarding experience.
So a lot of academics don't get that opportunity to write, because you write in a pretty theoretical way, I think, about her work and framing her work. You're definitely not writing a biography of this author. You're engaging in her work in a pretty advanced kind of intellectual way. So how does she respond to that? Because I feel like some authors might be like, what are you reading into this? I never figured that. How does that relationship work?
Yeah, she said very clearly the first time I met her, I'm sure that you'll find aspects of my work that I'm entirely unaware of, and I think that's great. So
that's awesome.
So she really kind of gives it over to the reader and to make of it whatever is, whatever that particular reader sees in it. She's not, she doesn't want to own it at all. And she's just excited to talk about philosophy, and she has an incredible knowledge of, especially, Western continental philosophy. But she brings it together with also an incredible knowledge of, the medical field and so neuropsychoanalysis, for like new fields as well that sort of combine and are interdisciplinary. So she really, she's always willing to share, and she read the dissertations.
That's
and
cool.
she liked it. So I was, of course, nervous.
That's
a strange
imagine.
moment when you're like, okay, here it is.
Here's
please don't hate me.
what I wrote about you and spend a long time figuring out. I hope you like it. It seems like she's the kind of author, I don't know a whole lot about her, but she writes about metaphysical issues, philosophical issues, medical issues, science. Was that because it's kind of an interdisciplinary type set of work, did that require a lot of research for you? Like, did you have to find out about all these different things? Well, it seems like a difficult topic to write about this author because she's got so many different interests.
Well, I think it certainly cost me a lot of time, but it also is what kept my interest. So, as you know, when you write about something and you have to, do that for years and years, you just need to be really fascinated by the subject matter. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it just gets such a long drag. And so I think what took me most work was getting through the philosophy. Reading Hegel was tough.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's the thing that we all have to come to in graduate school is are we going to tackle that stuff or not? It sounds like you did. So how does that, when you're writing about someone whose work you appreciate, someone that you're kind of a fan of, how is there a tension between like wanting to write and like show everybody like how cool this writer is, and at the same time like being critical and being being academic about it? Was that something that you struggled with? I guess what I mean is, were there times where you thought, there are unpleasant things that I have to write about, or something that I have to be critical about here that kind of contradicts what I like about it?
Yeah, see, I think I was able to kind of avoid that conflict, just because, first of all, I don't really think that we're entirely objective ever anyways.
Sure.
And so when we engage with any subject matter, having that kind of personal involvement that I had, I think it added to it rather than, but I know that people were asking me about that frequently, like, well, aren't you afraid that this is somehow gonna taint your critical perspective?
Sure.
And because it's mostly more of a conversation about the kind of philosophical ideas that go into her work and the constellation of the characters, etc. I just didn't feel, because I also definitely, I think it was on my mind. So I wrote a chapter on photography, and it was actually, I found a lot of very negative moments of like this kind of dynamics of the gaze and the representation of the self through photography. And so I talked a lot about Sartre and Lacan, etc. And I knew, well, that's probably something she wouldn't sign, or she
Sure.
wouldn't really necessarily agree with, but again, that was
that's part of writing critically, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so in graduate school, you're at Columbia and in this new New York world. What were your impressions of New York City? Because it sounds like you came to New York in the early 2000s. Is that right? Somewhere like
it was actually 2005, I think, a little later. Yeah. And I lived up in Harlem, so it was an interesting moment because gentrification just sort of picked up speed, I feel like.
Yeah, it's something that comes up a lot on this podcast, and I think it's probably because I moved to New York in 2003 and have became slowly aware of the kind of local politics, right?
Yeah.
So what was that? What was that like for you?
I mean, it's certainly highly problematic up there. And I lived in basically I lived east of Morningside Park, which was just kind of like the first people kind of who went to Columbia or worked there sort of pushed into that neighborhood.
Yes.
And if you go through it now, there are a lot of new condos and a lot of, I mean, the neighborhood really has changed drastically.
Yep.
So for me, I think being in New York City and having that kind of like city environment was, of course, that was new, and walking through Harlem and I mean, it just
were you not raised in an urban environment?
Even though Essen is a pretty big city, it was like where I lived was more suburban. It was really
it wasn't skyscrapers
quiet.
And subways.
No. So it was definitely a change, and it was exhilarating. I thought it was amazing, just even going on the subway and then
Me too.
getting out and
like
just looking around and I oftentimes I normally don't listen to music all the time, but I picked it up when I was in the city for the first time because I almost wanted to have the soundtrack to go with
this epic moment that I'm having here. Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like when I first got to New York, the subway system was something magical to me. I mean, I grew up with cars and car culture, and to be able, I mean, after living in LA, you get sick of cars. And so, getting rid of my car was a relief. Coming to New York and riding the subway was like, I felt it was like the Matrix. Like I could just warp magically around the city. And that feeling of not knowing what you were going to find when you popped out of the subway. I mean, now I know what to expect. And, I pop out and it just looks like, heading to work. Yeah. But those especially first few years in New York were really intense in terms of the structures of the city. Was it ever overwhelming to you? Did you ever feel like I can't take this?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's part of
I
the
mean,
New
there are
York
certain
experience.
places that now I know to avoid, but
Yeah.
that you go to when you first come to the
Like
city.
Times Square?
Like, yeah, just
Yes.
horrible. We recently went back because we saw Rocky the musical, because
Did you
my
really see
husband
Rocky
does
the
research
musical?
on professional wrestling, and it has the fighting sequences, and so we were, he was
I have
interested
to admit,
in
I was
it.
kind of intrigued by Rocky the musical.
Yeah.
Oh, how did you like Rocky the
I
musical?
surprisingly liked it a lot. It was good entertainment, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was very close to the movie.
Yeah,
so,
and they have the whole steps that he runs up
yeah,
and like does
it's
the
all
whole,
there.
all the everything,
Yeah.
every iconic moment from those
Yes.
those 18 movies.
Yeah.
So what it sounds like your first real engagement with America, like living here, would be in New York City. But New York City in some ways is not America because it has such an international element. Was that part of your experience too? Is the kind of
Absolutely.
the kind of the I don't know, the diversity of this place is kind of amazing.
Yeah,
isn't it?
which just kind of keeps being amazing.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons why I feel like this is a place I could live forever. Even though I miss nature, and
Sure.
I mean, it's just the one thing that I would love to have a little bit more, because even though you could get out of the city, you rarely do, because it's, everybody's too busy for it, and every year we say, oh, we'll just get a zip car and we'll go hiking, but other than that, it's just an amazing place.
It's
and
probably the number one thing Claudia and I talk about is like, oh, I wish we had a backyard. Like, I love New York, but I wish we had a backyard, and I wish we had a space to go run around at the beach or in the woods or something like that. It seems like a common refrain here among New Yorkers is to kind of lament the loss of nature in a way.
I guess I'm a little spoiled because we live in Astoria and we have a very small backyard, but it's funny because I never had a garden except for my parents' house, and then I moved to New York, and it's the first time that I actually plant flowers.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we have a fig tree and a mulberry tree, I guess I shouldn't complain at all when I think about that.
Yeah, I kind of hate you now for having that. Astoria is a very neighborhoody kind of place, though. For those that know New York City and know that Astoria is a place that's also rapidly gentrifying, but it's also, there's something really quiet and beautiful about Astoria. I always feel like I'm not in New York City, which is also kind of ironic considering Astoria is very close to Manhattan. It's like
it feels
Manhattan. Yeah, when you're walking around Astoria, Manhattan seems like right across the river there. And you've lived in Astoria for several years now.
Yeah, I moved in 2009,
okay.
so it's 4.5 years soon or something like that. Yeah, and Astoria is just it gives you peace of mind. It's so nice, and of course it's very close to LaGuardia, which is wonderful. I have that very nice commute. I'm thinking about taking my bike starting tomorrow for sure. I wanted to do it today.
Yeah, tomorrow is the most popular day to start taking your bike.
Probably.
I will take it tomorrow.
Yes.
I actually rode my bike to Baruch a lot a few years ago, and now I'm getting ready to sell my bike because I just got freaked out by the streets.
Well, but Baruch is in the middle of everything.
I mean, riding your bike through Midtown Manhattan in the middle of the day is like really exciting and really terrifying at the same time. And there were a couple close calls where I thought, I don't want to die on my bike. I would rather, take the subway. And so I feel like I shouldn't give in to fear that way, but at the same time,
but it's
scary.
Actually dangerous, I think, especially in Manhattan.
Well, people with cars are psychotic. You have to remember that. You get behind the wheel of a car, and I know this myself. You get behind the wheel of a car, and you turn into a different person. There's something to that. Okay, so you're in graduate school, and you graduate from Columbia when in.
I didn't graduate from Columbia. I was just there for a year to do research and write my dissertation, and then I went back to Germany, and we had a long distance relationship for a few years, and we decided that it's terrible and we should get married instead. But we got married in Germany, and it took us a whole year to go through the visa process. So during that time, I was not allowed to enter the United States. So that was really hard. After being married,
you were not allowed to enter the United States?
Yeah, you're not supposed to. So because then you endanger the whole visa process. So technically, they might just say, well, you did this, we told you not to, and now you can either stay away or wait much longer than you normally would, which is already a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the logistics of immigration policy are difficult anywhere, but yeah, even, and I think that in Western Europe we have this kind of idea that you can just go, especially Americans feel like, oh, I'm going to go work in France and I'm going to live in France, and you can't just necessarily do that. It's a little more difficult than you might think.
Even Europe is not that easy. Although once you are married, that was kind of funny because my husband was basically, we went to the city hall and he got free German lessons and he could have worked immediately. So once you do that, they make it a lot easier. But in the States, it's a long process, and it made you. It's a very frustrating process because there's nothing you can do about it. And even as two academics, we thought, well, we don't need a lawyer because we are able to fill out some paperwork. But at some point, we almost felt like, oh, we could have saved a lot of hairs from turning gray. And
yes. Does your husband speak German?
A little bit.
A little bit?
He's trying a little bit. We do spend quite a bit of time in Germany, and so he's exposed to the language a lot, so I think he understands quite a bit, but the speaking part is something we'll...
And it's probably, it probably doesn't help that it's probably pretty easy to get along just speaking English in Germany.
Yeah, everybody actually likes speaking English. They can practice,
They can practice.
Yeah.
And for me, like, German, whenever I hear it spoken, sounds like English. It has this kind of, there are a lot of cognates, and there are a lot of like they're similar languages in some respects. Okay, so what brings you to teaching, and what is your attitude towards teaching? I know that's kind of a broad question, but what I mean by that is, how do you see teaching as I assume that you have some sort of passion towards it, and how do you kind of conceive of your mission as a teacher? Because you're teaching at LaGuardia Community College, which is has a particular kind of social mission. How do you kind of conceive of yourself as fitting in that?
Yeah, I think what brought me to LaGuardia was more or less an accident. I mean, I didn't really know when I moved here that I would even be able to pick up any teaching jobs. I loved it back in Germany already, but what really made me passionate about teaching is the experience here at LaGuardia, because you really get to make some difference, at least,
I agree.
in students' lives. And my favorite classes to teach are really the 101, when they just come in. It's their first experience. A lot of them come from families who've, they don't have anybody else they can ask about what college is like. And just to be encouraging and giving them some of the tools that they can use throughout their college career afterwards, take them to 4-year colleges, not always, but a lot of them transfer. And it's just super rewarding, and it's just the happiest job for me, because LaGuardia students are also incredibly kind and wonderful. I mean, that it's a very diverse community too.
Oh yeah,
and
LaGuardia is one of the, and I'm not saying this because I'm biased because my wife works there, but LaGuardia is one of the more kind of inspiring CUNY schools in terms of its overall mission, and I say that as someone who's also in the CUNY system. I believe in it. There's something to that. I mean, I guess in a sense, it's where you're the place where your kind of politics and your overall kind of ideas about what the society should be intersect with what you're actually doing. Obviously, that it can be frustrating working in CUNY too, but at the same time, I think we all kind of got into this for that, right? Like there was did you feel like you wanted to have a job in your life? I know you were going to be a lawyer, but did you feel like you wanted your job to mean something? Was that a mission for you?
Absolutely. I think that was maybe my one regret about not pursuing law, because as you said, you can use
help a lot of people with law,
for very great purposes,
including helping people fill out their immigration papers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a chance to do this here at LaGuardia is actually simply amazing, because I taught at other places. I was at Wagner for a little while in Germany. So I just felt, that's great, and I still feel, of course, always strongly and passionately about doing that job, but being here, it's a different dimension, I think, because you really just bring your heart to it, and it really makes more of a difference, I think, than in some other places.
Yeah, and to be a little more, explicit about what I'm talking about is kind of like the idea that that LaGuardia is a working class school, and
Yep.
and you know, you're in a lot of ways the kind of structures of LaGuardia Community College emerged from the social kind of upheavals of the 1960s, and brought us to that kind of class awareness. You know, how did you come to a class awareness? Was it something that you were aware of in Germany, where you, like, poverty become something that you were aware of and kind of working on, or was the coming to the United States because for me, I mean, coming to New York was when I always was political, and I always was concerned with poverty, but New York City was the first place I actually
Definitely
saw it, right?
I think well, I mean, the way I grew up in Germany, was rather privileged, and and I also felt that, you know, when I went through to high school, to university, I just didn't have such a strong sense of imbalance as I have here, because still everybody gets a free education in Germany. You can actually go get a PhD, and you don't have to pay any tuition or master's. It doesn't really matter what kind of career you pursue. Of course, it still doesn't matter that everybody will, you know, there's of course still
Is that still true in Germany? Because I know that there's been a lot of austerity in European nations, but is it? I'm assuming that even you could cut social programs in Western Europe dramatically, and it would still be better than the United States in terms of their social safety nets there.
It's still true. They did try to have some tuition fees in some German universities, but what it is, it's about 500 euros per semester, and oftentimes it includes a bus ticket and you know, cheaper meals, and so I think overall it's so low that mostly it's still fine. And we have BAföG, which is a system where anybody who goes to school can then get money from the government, so for housing and living expenses, and then once you're done, at some point you have to pay back only half of it. So it's you know, at least I think there's enough of a support system for most people still to be able to pursue.
That's amazing, considering that, you know, we're coming to a something that they're referring to as a student loan bubble, when they realize that that the American young people are billions of dollars in debt, and that no one's ever going to be able to pay any of that off. We privatized a lot in America, and kind of capitalized a lot, including, you know, from student loans to health insurance, and that, I think that phenomenon has been disturbing. I was just kind of wondering how far that erosion has taken place in other countries. You know, one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, I know you write about food, right? You know, food politics.
Yeah, that's a rather new project, but yes.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit where you are? Because I know food politics is such a huge issue. I think it's you know, it touches on every single aspect of not just American politics, but politics in general. How did you get into food politics, and what is your angle on it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of emerges from the dissertation, just because I was interested in, you know, embodied identity and what it means to, you know, ingest and digest food and have that sort of material exchange with between self and other, and between self and the outside world. But then I went to ASA in 2012, I think, and
That's American Studies
That's
Association?
American Studies, yeah. And I gave a talk on Creole cookbooks and race and gender relations that are represented there, and that's in the post-Civil War era, so something very new.
How did that become an interest of yours, Creole cookbooks in the post-Civil War era? I mean, honestly, because there's such a kind of, I'm just fascinated by the things that people get into as academics, and that they find these kind of these areas of specialization. So what was it that drew you to Creole cookbooks?
I think the Creole is definitely something that I find fascinating, because I love everything that's hybrid, and where you have that sort of intersection of different cultures and you know, the kind of power relations that play into that. So I think that was immediately something like, oh wow, yeah, I want to definitely read more about it and think more about it. And then it just happens that some of the big first publications of Creole cookbooks came into that post-Civil War era, and they are closely linked to a kind of production of nostalgia for the Old South, and sort of that sadness almost that you can read there about, you know, oh, it used to be so, the gender relations and race relations used to be so clear, and now we're in this period of transition, and we're yearning to reestablish some of that through.
See, there's a nostalgia trap right there. Nostalgia about how things were better during that era. So do you cook Creole food? Have you tried any of this?
I'm not a great cook, unfortunately, but I do eat it.
Yeah. Are there Creole restaurants in New York? There got to be a few.
There's one actually in Long Island City. It's called Cranky's, I think, and it's pretty good. I mean, what I really want to do is go to New Orleans.
Yeah. It sounds like you need to.
Yeah.
You need to write it off as a research trip too.
That would be the ideal.
Have you seen Treme? Have you seen that TV show on HBO?
I haven't yet, and I really should.
Yes, I mean, it's not that it's all about Creole cooking or anything like that, but there's an element of food that's a big part of it. I think a few of the characters are chefs, and they're different. It's David Simon, so he did The Wire, and it's like, he investigates all different levels and hierarchies of cooking. So beyond Creole cookbooks in New Orleans, how do you relate to food and like what's happening with food? Because there's one of the things that's happening in Brooklyn is this kind of like, it's a mishmash of like artisanal food movement along with the Whole Foods market that just opened in Gowanus, and it seems like a lot of the changes that are happening in New York, like gentrification, are connected to food and or at least in the public discourse about it. Like, I remember someone said, or during Obama's election, he mentioned that he mentioned grocery shopping, and he said something about arugula, and everyone made fun of him. Do you remember this moment? So how do you conceive of that? Where do you fall? Do you eat artisanal food? Do you go to the good cheese shops in Brooklyn? And what does it feel like to go there?
One just opened up in Astoria actually, and we already did go there, and it's of course nice to have access to such products, but of course it also is a manifestation of the kinds of problems that come with food culture and food politics, because if you go to certain neighborhoods in New York City, obviously you cannot find those, and it's a sign of the change of the neighborhood, and it's catering to people with higher incomes who also have that kind of, I want to eat healthy and I want to be aware of the environment and all of that. I mean, it's great. We just got our first CSA for the summer, but it's also I'm kind of like I wish this kind of food should be accessible to everyone.
Yeah. There's a class element to it that's unsettling, and part of that might just be connected to education in a sense of people knowing about what's in their food. We are in New York. And in America in general, we're getting, very, very far from the production of food, right? And that's been a process that's been going on for many years as we continue to industrialize. But my students, not my students, but students that I help because I'm a communication fellow at Baruch. I help business courses with their debates, and they have to do these. They have to debate the big issues of the time. And one of the debates they do, some of them, they're really insane actually. Like sometimes they debate, are sweatshops a good way to organize a factory? They debate, should CEOs be paid as much as they are paid? And I mean, some of the things that they are made to say are just unbelievable in terms of like having to help a student argue, having to help a poor student argue that a CEO should get billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars a year is a really disturbing thing to be made to do. But one of the debates they do is GMOs and whether or not GMOs should be labeled. And what I'm always kind of struck by is how little we all know about all that stuff. The students particularly are lost when it comes to what a GMO is and where their food is coming from and what Monsanto is and all that stuff that I kind of like take for granted, I guess, because I've become concerned with that. So like, how do we overcome that? Is food politics something that you're introducing in your classes at all?
Yeah, we definitely talk about GMOs, about this kind of the labeling, and I think the reason why people don't know about it because it's actively being prevented.
Yes.
So it's not that the individual is not interested in what's going on, but it's really a more systematic problem.
If you're not like actively doing a research project to investigate this stuff, you're not going to find out about it. I mean, I'm not calling the students ignorant. I'm more just kind of, I guess it's a larger comment on kind of how that information is held from us in a lot of respects, because it's incredibly disturbing information.
Yeah, I think in Germany it's a little bit better, just because at least there's a higher sensitivity to the kind of possible dangers of GMOs, and so the labeling process is better there.
Yeah.
So of course then also complicates things when you have the exports, imports, etc.
Yep.
But yeah, what to do? I guess you can. Because I like Food Inc., for example, because it does educate.
It's a great movie.
But I don't like their solution, because then in the end it's like, you vote with a fork or something, like, whatever it is.
They're capitalist. They have a pro-capitalist message at the end of that movie, definitely. And they fall on the kind of like, I mean, they're on the Whole Foods kind of model, I think. And then you're right, they do put it all on the consumer at the end. But what would you see as a wider solution? What would you have preferred the ending of Food Inc. to have been?
Well, I guess we need to somehow have more of a voice on a higher level, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, when the FDA and other places are crowded with people who are in the food business, in Monsanto, etc., then just it doesn't matter where I go shop in the end, because that's just not going to be a solution. So I guess I don't have, other than the revolution.
No, you're right. I think that's what we always end up on when we talk about these kinds of issues, is like, oh, we need a fucking revolution in this country.
Food revolution,
and particularly around that issue. I think it's one that I think will be more important as we move forward, because of what you're saying about it kind of, intersects with people's bodies in a different way than other political issues. Food is something that everybody can kind of understand, and everyone can not only understand, but everyone's engaged with it. You're right. I mean, we put these things in our mouths, and digest this stuff, and it's a big part of our, I think, kind of identity. So, just to kind of wrap this up, I mean, you're from Germany. You come to Minnesota when you're young. You have this kind of horrific experience with not only America but Americans themselves. How now that you're older, you're more settled here in the United States, in New York City, which I assume, and I do know that you appreciate as much as I do.
Yeah.
How would you say your attitude towards America has changed? I mean, obviously we still have a very problematic kind of attitude towards things and wanting a revolution to come. But like, what is America to you now in a general way?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess living here, it has certainly changed my attitude. But I think I feel more politically engaged now than I was before.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean, because I remember at some point I posted something on Facebook about the healthcare system, because I was so upset, and then one of the reactions was like, well, why don't you just go home then, right?
Oh,
and
really?
Somebody who's no longer a friend. but just it doesn't mean, I think it just means that I care more about the country now than I did beforehand. And
because you're more invested in it.
And so for me, I'm always a little bit torn, because there's always Germany, and there are certain things about it that I miss, and certain things, especially bigger systematic things, that I think are done a little bit better there than over here. But I think it just means that there's more work to do, and keep doing it. And the solution for me is not to move back to Germany, because it's just like I feel too invested in my life here.
But you, how do you maintain a cultural identity? Because I see this wasn't like you left Germany because you hated Germany. So how do you navigate your Germanness in the United States?
Well, I guess while I'm here, I really don't maintain it very well. We do every once in a while go to a German beer garden or a German restaurant, and that's about it. I don't really have friends from Germany here, but I do keep in touch with people there. I still read Die Zeit, the German newspaper. I see my family regularly.
Do you go to German websites?
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. The .de, right?
Yeah. I do.
Yeah. In New York City and Brooklyn in particular, there's this kind of brewery culture that's happening right now, and it's interesting because I'm sure you're aware that Brooklyn used to be a place that was filled with German breweries. There was Brooklyn. German was the language that was most spoken besides English in the United States prior to World War I and World War II, and that history has kind of been erased in a lot of ways. The breweries were attacked and closed, and that was that. And so to see brewery culture come back in Brooklyn without the German kind of history to it, or the German culture, is kind of a weird kind of erasure for me. Is that something you've thought about, that the place used to be more German than it is? It was called Germantown. I mean, literally, like parts of New York were Germantown. We don't have that anymore.
I feel like I almost missed that moment. By the time that I moved here, I feel like
it
was almost
history.
already gone. The only thing we still do is we have a German January party once a year in January, and then I go back to the Upper East Side. There's still like one German butcher shop, and the people who work there are German. Most people who are in there are German. So that's my.
Is that Heidelberg?
Yeah, it's next to Heidelberg.
Yeah,
it's a Schaller and Weber. So.
And that's still open? I thought they were. They
still
were.
Exists.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's my one German moment I can still find here, but I wouldn't even know where else to go.
There's a place called Lederhosen in the West Village.
Right, and then we went there and we ordered white sausage, and it's this really traditional Bavarian meal where it has a thicker skin, so you have to cut it open and kind of peel it out and eat it with sweet mustard. And they served it on a bun. I didn't even know how to eat it because you have to cut it open and get it out of the skin.
They did it like American style.
Yeah,
they gave
so
you
it was like a hot dog,
basically.
Yeah. So other than that, I think I like the beer. And
see, it's so funny to know. It's because that's a funny thing about living in New York, is going to ethnic restaurants and feeling like, oh, I'm getting something authentic, but you don't necessarily. There's a syncretism there too. You're getting like an American version of a roughly German meal.
Yeah,
right?
Which is, of course, my experience whenever I go to a Japanese, Thai, whatever restaurant, and I just think, oh yeah, that's the thing, and I just have no point of comparison.
Yeah, are you a sushi fan?
I became one moving to New York City. I actually didn't eat it beforehand. Now I love it.
I think there were a lot of things I never ate before in New York City, not because I didn't want them, but because they weren't available in the places. I mean, New York is kind of amazing for that. Well, Christine, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.